Excellent. Well, thank you all again. I'm Rachel Guerra Lorenzo. I am one of the co-founders of Indigenous Women Rising, and I am the executive director. And to help me kind of like weed out any trolls and help control the chat, we have our communications and media director, Jennifer Lim. Jennifer, I know we didn't discuss this beforehand, but if you want to add commentary, please do. Jennifer is seriously one of the most hilarious people I've ever met. And also her commentary is just brilliant. So I just wanted to offer that. Please come off mute if you're like, let's whatever. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. If you're watching this after December 1st, or if we go over an hour, this webinar will be recorded. So that way you can watch it in chunks. I kind of have a feeling it's going to be longer than an hour, but we have so much to share. So why this webinar? Over the last couple of months, we've been asked how we are weathering all of this growth. Before I truly start, I also want to recognize that I have children and I will be interrupted. That's the nature of it. Hey, it happens. Yeah, over the last couple of months, we've been asked, how are we weathering all this growth and how do we operate? Because we are one of the only organizations like us in the country, people are really curious about how we work. And some of the reactions we've gotten are awe and shock and confusion. And so I really wanted to reiterate.
Angie's mom's here. Okay. And Angie, come on.
Okay.
They need you.
For what?
I don't know if they need you.
Okay, but I'm working. Can you ask Angie's mom to text me? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, put Selena in the crate. Sorry, y'all. Family. Indigenous Women Rising is truly an experiment, and we are constantly changing. And it wasn't until I became an ED that I realized just how much change happens, and we don't really talk about how we've changed. And so I've organized this webinar to share our ideas and my strategies and my philosophy in leadership. Okay, move my picture right there. I want to acknowledge that wherever any of us are in the United States and Canada, that we are all on stolen, unceded land. Yes, son.
Can I have a roll up?
Huh?
Can I have a roll up?
Yes. Important questions, am I right? And because I am Pueblo and Apache and Chicana, I am on my own ancestral land. And if you'd like to know what or whose land you're on, I'm dropping a link in the chat. Actually, I'll just type it in here. Land.ca. You can type in your zip code wherever you call home, and it will show you the Indigenous community that stewarded the land where you call home. And land acknowledgements kind of give me the ick, because especially when non-Native people do it, because there's never, to my memory, there's never a call to action. And so my call to action is relatively easy. It's for you to donate to that community. When you type in your zip code into this map, for you to really dig in and research, what has this community contributed to what has this Indigenous community contributed to, the wider community or to your state, and supporting their efforts however you can. Over 80% of the globe's biodiversity is protected by Indigenous people, and we make up a really small percentage of the larger population. And of course, Indigenous people have faced some of the most atrocious human rights abuses. And one of the ways that we can help mitigate that, besides a land acknowledgement, is actually giving your resources and investing that back into Indigenous communities. So now this other question, who am I, Rachel Lorenzo, to have this conversation? For those who care, I have a bachelor's in political science and a master's in public administration with a focus on public health. And my training is in managing programs, but I'm still learning how to put this into action. Since I founded this organization, the response to the needs in the community and the need for the org to respond to that have changed over the years. And I know that our organization has something unique to offer to other executive directors, other organizers, or people who want to get involved or start their own thing. And I started realizing that leadership in a nonprofit organization or in a repro or reproductive health and justice org does not need to be shaped the way that we have always seen it operated. It doesn't, we'll get to that a little bit later, but it doesn't have to be this way, essentially. And that is a line I stole from Jennifer. It doesn't have to be this way. So who are we? We're just a bunch of like really incredible, badass people, I must admit. I founded Indigenous Women Rising in 2014 after I needed an abortion. And I needed community after that abortion. And for 3 years, I took the time to learn how to organize better and how to lobby and how to cultivate my own relationships with elected officials. In 2017, I brought on my cousin, Malia Luarki, who co-founded our birth and breast and chest feeding program. She's the tall Black woman standing, or the Black woman standing in the back of the larger picture. In 2018, I needed a volunteer as I launched our abortion fund, and Nicole Martin, who was squatting down, looking all fierce, answered the call to volunteer and help shape the future of what the org looks like. And I mentioned the addition of adding co-founders because it was such a huge ask of them and also of myself. Am I really ready and willing to bring on new people who have different personalities and different skill sets and even different interests to guide the future of this organization? And I wouldn't have thought of the incredible things that we're able to do now without these two. Yes, son.
Has she texted you yet?
No. And now that we've grown, as you can see from the picture on the, what is this, on my right, you can see we have Johnette on the far left of that picture, who is our abortion fund director. And the lovely angel squatting down with the devil horns is Jennifer Lim, who's joining me on this panel to help moderate you trolls. Hopefully there are no trolls. There's Anya, who's standing up in the V-neck. She is one of the co-founders of our sibling fund, the Mariposa Fund. There's me looking all fine. And then there's our tribal liaison, Sandy. I just really wanted to help put faces to names because my team is frankly really incredible. And every single one of these people brings a different skill set and a way of approaching what I envision for their position. What I envision for each of these positions is not actually how it's carried out. It's really time to get to know my staff as individuals, and what they're comfortable with, what they're willing to grow in or what they want to grow in, and figuring out how can I help cultivate that. And this means there's a balance I have to strike between flexibility in their positions and what does accountability look like for each of us according to our needs. And that means flourishing is not mutually exclusive from accountability. Pull myself down here a little bit. Okay. So I put up our IRS status, a private foundation, not a public charity. I will get into why this is a super important part of what we do, and our experiences with philanthropy and with funders. So from 2014 through 2016, it was really difficult to get funding, and I was pretty lost on how to do that, but I still tried to stay engaged with volunteering and learning from other executive directors. And in 2017, IWR received its first grant through the New Mexico Breastfeeding Task Force for $10,000. And I learned that a fiscal sponsor will take a cut of the money that you bring in to help them with accounting costs and possible program management. And then we transitioned to the New Mexico Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, which is another sibling fund here in New Mexico. And that relationship was a great lesson in what values alignment really means in practice. And the barrier with this was that very few funders were willing to grant to IWR because we didn't have our own status as a nonprofit. And we worked with UNM Law School and Serge Martinez, who oversees a law clinic where law students help growing, budding community orgs find their footing with the Secretary of State and stuff. And it was, and helping us file the paperwork with the Secretary of State, helping us build out our bylaws and a few other policies that we need, and with the IRS. And it was a really long process, but we had an incredible student, shout out to Michael, who got us what we needed. So it wasn't until September of last year that we received our letter from the IRS. And now we're a nonprofit, but we're categorized as a private foundation. And I learned that part of that is because our org is, we do have family members on the board and in the org. It's a pretty good mixture. There are reasons behind that. At some point, I am more than happy to talk about why for us, for our org, that is beneficial. And there's an EIN on the screen if there are any funders listening in and want to give to us. So why is there extra wealth in philanthropy and foundations to give away to organizations? Let's talk about the reason why there's extra wealth, why that exists. First, nonprofits exist to fill in gaps in a community where government is not providing certain services. If abortion was covered, if midwifery was covered, if midwives were paid a thriving wage and were reimbursed the same way that OBGYNs in a hospital setting were reimbursed, we wouldn't exist. If it was possible for us to have open conversations about sex and normally bodily functions, we wouldn't exist. We exist because of conscious policy decisions to limit access to abortion, the high rates of maternal mortality, barriers to safe, medically accurate, culturally sensitive sex education. And those are health needs that we know the government has limited, should be providing, and has failed to remediate. That being said, the extra wealth is from people who will always have their basic needs met and get tax write-offs. And these people essentially don't pay all of their taxes. And those funds could be put back into the community through taxes, but I also acknowledge that's a double-edged sword because the working class doesn't always have time to participate in conversations with elected officials about how funds are allocated. And I also believe that budgets are a great way to see where priorities and values are. So for example, currently the Department of Interior, which is led by Deb Haaland, shout out to Deb, makes up 0.74%, so less than a percent of the national budget. And this department is where the Bureau of Land Management is held and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So our native issues are at the federal level are less important than say defense spending and healthcare spending. And we cannot separate these things philosophically, but obviously it's done at the federal level. And I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of like why that is. Because of the acknowledgement of less taxes being paid by the wealthy, I believe that our communities are entitled to that money that would have otherwise gone back into communities. And again, it's a cycle of the lack of investment and services in a community by the government, which is where nonprofits come in. And many times we are fighting amongst each other about funding. Our experience with philanthropy has not always been positive. We are constantly asked for specific documents that we actually don't have because we didn't need to start filing certain kinds of paperwork or doing certain kinds of reports until we became our own nonprofit. So the ask for donors of us to provide X amount of years worth of 990s and audits, we don't have those things. And it's mind-boggling to me that that kind of stuff is asked for, especially of an org like ours. Like they hadn't ever heard of our organization before, and they know that we're relatively new in like a philanthropic sense. So why would we have those kinds of, or how could they expect to make that a demand? And I will show you how it is a demand rather than a request and an ask for potential collaboration and capacity building and partnership. The burden should not be on organizations to always have all of these documents, especially ones that are publicly available, like 990s. It shouldn't be on the organization to always provide those if they can be found without leadership, without organizational leadership. Another example of a very seemingly arbitrary rule that we have encountered with foundations and individual philanthropists is that funders will only give to public charities and not private foundations. We've had to return tens of thousands of dollars worth of checks because of our IRS designation, which isn't something that we can help. And so I wonder, you know, is the mission not enough? Is the clientele we serve not enough? And we have never received a clear answer from funders why this is even a thing, why this is even a role for them. And I will show in the next slide how one of the answers we're given is that just because they can't. And when I've asked other funders, you know, is there something that's prohibiting you from giving to a private foundation? Because I want to be transparent that we are a private foundation. And they say no. So we've never gotten a clear answer as to why public charities should be prioritized over private foundations, despite the work that is being done by the organization. So why would we even have to return checks? This is because the funder and their staff did not do their due diligence by researching the status, which again is publicly available information. And not to say we're biting the hand that feeds, but, I want to acknowledge that it is a blessing. It is absolutely an honor to just be sent checks and to get calls and say, hey, we want to give to your organization. so rad. That is super cool. We rarely have to apply for those funds, which is incredible. But my question to funders is always, why do you say, oh, we're going to send you 25, 50, $75,000, and they send the check out and they're like, we got it in the mail. We just wanted to confirm your mailing address. And then we get a letter along with that check that says, by cashing this check, you agree that you are a public charity and not a private foundation. And it's like, why do you even send a check anyway? Why didn't you do your due diligence? And we've had to refund money, like write a check ourselves and send that amount back to a funder because they didn't make that clear to us, nor did they have that conversation with us. And so to me, that's just bad practice to essentially say, oops, just kidding. We didn't do our research. So that shouldn't be on organizations, especially organizations led by people of color to do that kind of labor when we know the majority of philanthropists are white. So yeah, have that conversation with us before you send a check. How do we change fundraising goals? Yes, Jennifer.
I just wanted to interrupt really quickly to remind folks if they have any questions to just enter them into the Q&A, and then we'll get to them later throughout. That's all.
Yes, if folks have questions, please put them in the chat. Really, this is our perspective, our experiences as an organization. So, you know, if there are other bits of insight we can offer, happy to do it. How do we change fundraising goals? I wanted to touch on this briefly because as we started getting bigger in 2018, we experimented with a bunch of different metrics on event success rather than a dollar amount, even if it was a fundraiser. And this is especially important because we did a lot of collaborative funding with sibling funds in New Mexico. And when you have an event that is supposed to be inviting to community, and some of the folks might not have the funds, but really want to learn about the work, or they've been impacted personally by our work, or have an experience where they wish a resource like us could have been available. We ask them for their emails and invite them to share their stories and their skills with our organizations. So what else can we share besides an exchange of money? And having worked on political campaigns from the time I was 18 up until I was about 30, I know that it doesn't feel super good to realize that I actually can't afford to attend the events that I'm organizing, or helping organize, or volunteering for. You know, a $500 table or seat at a table is not doable for a majority of people. And so it made me question, why am I supporting these candidates or this effort of candidates who claim to represent me, who claim to represent my family and my values. So why would I perpetuate that as one of the co-founders of this organization? And this kind of community-centered approach to event planning and fundraising is contradictory to what we see, to what we typically see. But I'm really proud of these efforts because the people who are most impacted by harmful reproductive health policies are the ones on my staff. Yes, son. No, nothing yet. Sorry. Yeah, those are the folks on my staff, and they use their own lived experiences to create funds or programs or events that are fun and creative and frankly pretty innovative. And we know as spiritual Indigenous women and femmes in this organization, and this might sound woo-woo to some, but it is truly one of the foundations of our work because we firmly believe that the work that we do at IWR is spiritual work, that the prayers for our people are answered in the outcome of our events, and then the generous donors to our organization, whether it's a recurring donation of $1 which shows that low-income folks are invested in what we do, and then larger donations of $2,000 from individuals or $5,000. Folks are giving to us from retirement, and to me, that's incredible, and we're so grateful for that. And we know that when we're planning events, many times we have to eat the cost. We have to absorb the cost of some events because of who we want to join our movement, and it goes beyond money. And frankly, I'm pretty proud of that. So what is values alignment? That's my dog, Selena, in the background. The National Network of Abortion Funds, which is currently led by Oriaku Njoku, who is brilliant, has a document and regularly has trainings and check-ins with member abortion funds to ensure that the work that we are doing as abortion funds is anti-racist and client-centered. And that means we are truly creating procedures that take care of the client rather than just someone who needs an abortion. It also means that we are taking care of our staff or our volunteers, as many funds are led by volunteers or by clinic staff, like the Mariposa Fund that's an example of a clinic managed abortion fund. And I very much believe that IWR's success is because of the staff feeling confident that conflict can be addressed so they can do their job better. I feel like as long as we engage in some of those hard, sticky feelings around conflict, that we can make sure that we're always in alignment with each other, and that we have that we've expressed our expectations for how events or programs should be run. And that's a huge part of what the National Network of Abortion Funds has taught me in my time engaging with them since 2018. Never once in my time engaging with the National Network of Abortion Funds, or NNAF, have I ever felt uncomfortable voicing a different opinion or disagreeing with someone, or lovingly pushing back on something during a discussion. And that's the kind of environment that I want to bring into Indigenous women raising. So we're going to move on to some examples, some terrible examples of philanthropy and giving. I don't know if folks can really see this. I have some screenshots. So this first screenshot is about a $25,000 check, reaching out for guidance. Many grant agreements we receive require us to not be a private foundation, and this excludes us in another way from including Indigenous people in the reproductive justice spaces and limits us in helping our people. Anytime we get asked to send money back or to not cash a check or something, I always feel it's important to voice to funders, because I am now part of a donor advised fund. I feel it's really important, and it's part of my responsibility to my organization and to my community to express the racism that is inherent in giving. Here's a screenshot from an Instagram DM, someone who was demanding that we get in touch with them. This person says, I've given you my email and phone, call me. I'm not emailing you. It should be the opposite if you need funding. Our deadline is to distribute is August 31st. Otherwise, I'll remove your organization. Like, don't threaten me with a good time. Don't threaten my staff or my org. This is not a donation. Like, that kind of attitude from funders, along with like dangling the dollar bills in front of us, is so unnecessary and just really perpetuates that power, harmful power dynamic of money and communities of color. And so I essentially responded with, I don't know how much you were going to give us, but it's not worth this kind of attitude, and frankly dehumanizing way that you're talking to my staff. And then she blocked us. So good riddance.
Rachel, I just want to add that I'm glad that you said she blocked us, because she started with us and then made sure to block us at the end, which was my favorite part of this interaction with, yes, she is a white woman.
And keeping in mind, like, a majority of these funders are white, and the way that we are spoken to is ridiculous. It sucks, and it makes me feel incompetent in a lot of ways sometimes. Here's an email from someone who is like, I just want to make sure, or I just want to check and see if your status has changed. Like, oh, I should have blocked that one out. Well, Sonia, the IRS website is free and you have access to the internet. It's very obvious because you sent us an email. So please do that research yourself. Here's another one of another check for $25,000 that I had to send back. Again, I will never stop telling funders you're being cheap. As us natives say, stop being cheap. You know, the burden is on the organization to do that due diligence for the grantor. That should not be a thing. This particular funder was not willing to investigate or collaborate with us on a creative solution. You know, could we get a fiscal sponsor that is a public charity and have them re-grant the money and we'll give them a cut, or whatever. There was no willingness to engage with us in that way. They're like, no, just give us our money back. You shouldn't have sent us a check in the first place. And then here is an example of what I said when, you know, they didn't explain, oh, they can't complete the donation because of IRS rules. What rules? Because we get funds from other private foundations. We get funds in the last almost 2 years. We've been getting funds as a private foundation from foundations, from individual philanthropists, from, you know, people's retirement, you know, that might have certain stipulations on how they give. So it is always baffling to me why people would put in so much effort into making these very arbitrary rules instead of using their money to truly help people because they didn't pay their taxes. And if, yeah, it's weird. Okay, now I'm getting to some of the internal workings. I'm moving into like my philosophy as an ED. So here, these top 4 bullet points are some questions that I'm always asking myself when I'm making executive decisions about programming or staffing needs. How much do I value staff as individuals rather than what they can provide? For me, what that means is my sense of urgency more important than their time to rest after normal business hours at like 6 or 7 p.m. when I'm still working? Why do I have that expectation from my staff when I have told them in the past, please stop working at like 4 or 5? Why am I requiring a specific policy or process? Too many times I have seen executive directors or other kinds of directors implement super ridiculous policies around attendance or time off as more of a frankly, a power grab to assert and maintain their own sense of order rather than what I would hope is a more holistic approach that serves staff. And do I have the time or willingness to maintain this policy or process? And I'm going to tell you right now, my answer is hell no. As you can see, I'm a parent. That doesn't stop. I work 2 jobs. You know, I have a lot of other responsibilities. And so for me, putting myself in the staff's position. You know, how would I want my time outside of work respected? And frankly, we should be looking at our internal policies from this perspective, because in my experience, it helps the creativity flow when there isn't so much of a power grab or the need for directors or leadership to assert that dominance. We know you're a director. We know you're in leadership. It says so in your title. Is there a difference between how I hold myself accountable versus how I hold myself accountable? For example, something that I've implemented is that I have given all of my staff the login for our bank account and for our PayPal accounts. These are accounts that I monitor regularly. And part of my reasoning is capacity building, especially for directors. And the other part of it is because I believe in accountability, and this is one way I can do that. If there's an expenditure that might be questionable or whatever, and my staff is like, hey, what was this for? You know, is this coming from the abortion fund or whatever? Like, I really want us to have that kind of open transparency. And I really encourage the staff to go to the board of directors if they have concerns about my leadership. Can I be flexible with the due date? Almost always, yes. You know, just as my staff would want me to make sure that they get paid on time every 2 weeks. Like, they depend on me for certain things and I depend on them for certain things, and there should be some kind of transparency there. What does bring your full self mean to me? When I first heard this when I was like 26 or 27, I was like, honestly, I don't know what the hell this means. I don't know what that means. Bring your full self. Like, I am not missing any limbs. I am here. But as I've grown in this position as the executive director, now I have my own interpretation of what that means. And it's a guiding question for me in my management style, which for the academics might be seen as the servant leadership model. So how can I help my staff feel like they aren't a burden for having a bad day? As Indigenous people and some people of color, we are constantly reminded to be small and always be accommodating to everybody, disrespecting our own boundaries, don't complain, especially to leadership or to authority figures. So how can I, as a parent and a caregiver, help my staff who are also either parents or caregivers who work at IWR fulfill their obligations to their communities, to their families, while ensuring the work gets done and making sure, you know, we're all on the same page about reworking timelines and due dates and roles. This leads me to my last 3 bullet points here. Staff time management. As I mentioned before, I do not have the time or the willingness to micromanage my staff's time. I understand that a lot of our work is meetings and a few hours of planning. Many times, realistically, let's not BS ourselves or each other. A lot of what we can do or needs to get done can get done in like 5 hours or less, and it might be spread out throughout the week. I absolutely consider listening and watching webinars, reading, taking time to be creative, absolutely a part of the workday. Because of the kind of work that we do, you know, engaging with weirdo funders, listening to stories of other community members when they're seeking abortion or needing help with diapers or something, you know, those are really heavy things. And so I really want my staff to feel like they have the tools available to them to kind of like decompress because this work can be so demanding. What other agreed upon mechanisms can I implement to ensure that work gets done and that we are accountable to each other when we're sick or taking time off? So I don't have timesheets. We're all salaried and we all have our own ways of holding each other accountable. Email, Slack notifications from Airtable, which are some communication platforms, some organizing platforms, figuring out how I can automate some things, because I love tech. I help the staff out with that. Signal, the tasks feature in Gmail, calendar invites, really getting creative with the tools that we have available to us, excuse me, and figuring out how that works into, or how that plays into our workflow and how that helps us stay in communication with our teammates. Generous policies. I'm really proud of these. I know that IWR has among the most generous policies, and I know that I like nice things. I love technology, and I'm really passionate about data safety. And one of our policies is about tech and the tech that we buy for our staff and our board members. So I totally understand that my staff have lives outside of their job, just like you. And that sometimes some of us work more than one job. I'm trying to get it to a point where my staff can have one job and not feel super stressed out outside of that. But they can keep their computer even after they've left the organization. A lot of our work is cloud-based, or on the interwebs, and so we have our own ways of making sure that staff who leave the org don't have access to their email or to organizational things, but the machine itself, that's for them to keep, because it is frankly a luxury for people of color to have, especially to have access to a computer and to have our own computer rather than having to share one. And so that's one of our policies. And we shouldn't just have like leftovers or expired products or cheap products. I want my staff and board members to have reliable, quality tech to be able to do their jobs and make sure that they have access to the platforms that they feel are going to help them get the job done. And so we will cover a new laptop every 2 years, up to $1,500, but we're flexible with that. $1,500, and I'm about to revisit this policy. Another policy we have is unlimited PTO, or personal time off, and we have self-care grants and time off. So in 2023, every quarter, we're starting in 2023, every quarter we're going to each get 1 week off paid and an extra $200 to take care of ourselves. In the 2 years since Cole and I have been experimenting with a lot of these policies, we have yet to encounter problems with accountability and continue to have open and hard conversations about improvement and accountability and making sure everyone can own a solution to whatever an issue is. In 2023, we will be offering retirement where IWR will contribute to all staff's retirement, regardless if they contribute to their own retirement, and covering 100% of medical, vision, and dental insurance. And then adding dependents will be partially covered. And we have the means now, so why not put it back into the staff? The last thing on here is a social fund, which we're going to experiment with in 2023. This means setting aside maybe $10,000 to help staff in an emergency or a big life event like moving deposits, or like a deposit on a new apartment, or groceries, with some limitations on how often it's utilized and how much. Because we know that having these very basic needs met, like housing, and groceries and personal hygiene things, are some of the ways that have been proven to help with mental health. So I know what I've shared here was like a lot. It was a lot of me talking. But after the year we've had with Roe v. Wade being struck down, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and its potential downfall because of the Supreme Court, I just wanted to share how we're taking into consideration not just how we care for our clients and communities, but also the staff. And I know that labor is also a reproductive justice issue, and that everyone, whether they have children or not, should be paid not a living wage, but a thriving wage. No matter what, we all deserve to take care of ourselves. And in this violent and capitalistic country, and on stolen land, with stolen money, with stolen wealth, I want IWR to be an example of where we as leadership can get creative and push the boundaries of what we've been taught nonprofits should be rather than what they could be. So that's my ask to leadership who might be listening in now live or later on, really examining what are my legal obligations, and then looking at internal policies or procedures and thinking like, where can I be flexible? Where can the staff have input and get creative? Because at least with our org, we're a small 7-person org, and we plan on growing even more. That it is possible to do all of these things and take care of community and staff. And I just wanted to shout out a little list of people who have really helped me over the years solidify these experiments within IWR, because we're still an experiment. National Network of Abortion Funds, Repro Jobs, Repro Action, ARC Southeast, which is an abortion fund based in Atlanta, Georgia, the Arizona Abortion Fund, Northwest Access Abortion Fund, Buckle Bunnies Fund, Alejandra Pablos, Bold Futures, Aime Thorne Thompson, Koya White Hat Artichoker, Zach Pacino, and of course, my staff for being examples of radical and loving and apologetic leadership to IWR. Here's my email. So please reach out if you have any questions. We have about 10.5 minutes left. So if there are any questions in the Q&A, or if you want to put it in the chat, let's have a little discussion. And if we go over an hour, we go over an hour. But yeah, Jennifer, did you want to add anything?
I did just want to know, excuse me, the chat is actually disabled, so folks have to ask their questions in the Q&A. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts, but because this is Rachel's time to shine, I want to see if sort of the things that I'm thinking correlate to some of the questions that y'all have. Rachel, I don't know if you saw, there is a question in the chat now. Jen Maynard asked, what does the wellness grant look like? Is that in-house? I love this idea and would like to know more. You're muted.
Yeah, Jen, thank you for asking that question. So we were given a grant by NewMexicoWomen.org for $4,000, and it was called a healing grant. And they were like, use this to take care of yourselves. And we were like, okay. So for the last quarter of this year, and then the first quarter of 2023, we'll be utilizing that grant for everybody. So everybody gets an extra $250 in their first paycheck of the quarter. And yeah, after that, I will fundraise for that, as part of our our fundraising strategies. I'm very, very grateful that most of our funding is unrestricted. So I would like to make sure that that is included in our future budget projections. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad that resonated with you. Jennifer, I know you had some thoughts. Share your thoughts because we still got time.
Okay, let me see what I want to say. I think as someone who's worked in other organizations, other nonprofits, and Rachel touched on this before, that the way things are done don't have to be done that way. It is a choice, right? And so the way that Ray leads our team and leads our organization is very different. I don't think it has to be radical. Unfortunately, it is, but it is a strength of theirs. I mean, they've already been open to note that when they don't know things, they just say so. I've worked for other people where they claim that that's okay too, to not know things, but they don't actually mean that, because there's no collaborative process with trying to figure out the answer. There's no trust within the team. I mean, I feel pretty grateful and pretty honored to be a part of IWR, because I think what we do together is something very different. And yeah, I just hope that other folks, I don't know the makeup of folks who are on the call, but people who do have power where they work, or even in, their own communities, that you can do something different. It doesn't have to be the way that it's always been. We can reimagine something different. I see that there are some questions.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. Yeah, I really want us to be an example of how this is staff led. And even though as a co-founder and as an ED, it's not just about me. I really want to avoid founder syndrome, because I see how detrimental it can be to the work and encouraging communities to engage, especially when organizations claim to be community centered. So Nona asked, what kinds of trainings does IWR provide in terms of capacity building for communities where repro justice is not on the radar? For instance, where I'm from, much of the work I can do is still seen as taboo and challenging to talk about. How did IWR deal with the taboo in our home communities? That's an excellent question. It's scary. It's part of the reason why having family on as part of our organization was really important to me. So my husband is on the board, and he is in he's in a clan that is important in our traditional doings. And it's really important for the organization and for our community to have, especially a cishet man, when we know that 75% of our tribes are led by men across the country, to have cishet men honor the framework of reproductive justice and how it shows up in our communities. And so a lot of that is looking at what is the demographic, or what is the makeup of the people who push back, and then how can we find champions, and then start having those conversations. So this is a years-long process. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. But we are going to be working with some Native folks in Idaho, because I do have a colleague there. They've agreed to help us with a kind of train the trainer. Well, they'll have a cohort of Native men to talk about reproductive justice and the history of abortion in Native communities, and then develop their own strategies for like lobbying and community organizing. So yeah, it's really just looking at who holds the power in our Native communities, and then where are the champions within those groups of power, and then how can we utilize them to advocate for us, so that way we can like kind of push in And one of an example I have of that is, my husband talking to his classmates from high school about the need to support breastfeeding, his friend's partner breastfeeding their baby in public, no matter where they are, and not forcing her or pressuring her to cover up. And so even that one conversation and him explaining one of our projects, which was making our traditional regalia more breastfeeding friendly, totally changed the perspective of that person. And so now, that to me is the culture and the narrative shift. What are some ways that other funds, I'm not sure what PSOs are. I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. Practical support orgs. Oh, okay. Oh, duh, Rachel. What are some ways that other funds and practical support organizations can support and uplift the work of IWR right now? It would really, so one of the things is, just building up that cultural competency within your own fund or your own organization about the communities that, the Native communities that are within the region that you serve, because they might not disclose that they're Native, but having some way of expressing, that while your staff or whoever might not be Native, or they have some understanding of cultural competency, that they're always willing to learn and they're willing to find answers and figure out how to be more culturally sensitive. And ways that you can show up for us is really just showing up for the Indigenous communities in your region. That's really what our goal is to make sure that we're starting that conversation and bugging people to like, hey, you should really care about Native issues because they impact you too, whether it's climate change, whether it's health policy, whether it's defense spending, or whatever it is. Native issues are always so entwined in these like larger discussions where there isn't a whole lot of discussion or analysis. And so one way you can show up for us is by showing up for the people, the Native folks in your region, your community. Do I have thoughts on large for-profit organizations that try to involve Indigenous community as stakeholders? No. Yes and no. With for-profit, I think there is much more latitude for what you're able to give your money to, and including Indigenous communities as stakeholders. I really encourage for-profit, nonprofit, and government agencies to engage tribal leadership and hold space for community organizers from those tribes. There is a disconnect between tribal leadership and community organizing that I've seen in my over a decade of organizing. And while that is not for non-natives to get involved in, holding space for both of those factions, I guess, would be really helpful, because there's the Native leadership, which is a small group and might not, just like in politics, right, might not be totally representative of the whole community. And again, going back to my point earlier, nonprofits exist because the government, including tribal government, might not be meeting a need that is there. And so if holding space for both of those would be really important, and figuring out how can you utilize funds. What the hell? That was my dog. How can you use those funds to really, it's a wild night. I have no idea, son. maybe she's hungry. Yeah, sorry about that. So holding space for both of those, but again, like figuring out where your flexibility is as far as like spending or involving different, or even like re-granting to certain tribal efforts. For example, Acoma Pueblo didn't have running water for like 2 weeks. I don't even know if they have running water right now. But the ability for for-profit organizations to really make a difference in communities proactively and having relationships with tribal governments and tribal officials, I really think could be beneficial to for-profit organizations. And Diane Riley, amazing, beautiful, totally necessary work. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Also, your last name is my maiden name, so are we relatives? Okay. Looks like we're at 6:02. I think we made excellent time. What do you think, Jennifer?
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was kind of afraid I would go over. To the folks I see on here, shouts outs to Christy and Fela and Sandy. Y'all are awesome. All right, y'all have a great weekend. Oh, we have another Q&A. What's your favorite Shasta? Did Shasta ever have that strawberry kind? Because I really liked strawberry soda, but I can't remember if it was Shasta. Yeah. But you know what? The all-time best Res Cola is that RC Cola. That will always be my favorite. It will give you diabetes, absolutely. But you know what? RC Cola that was power. All right, y'all have a great weekend. Thank you for spending a Friday night with me, and hopefully we'll all cross paths soon. Bye.